Like and subscribe right now, or else this will be in your bed tonight. r/ask Reddit by Planet Reddit. 911/999 dispatch. What's the dumbest reason someone has called? I had a woman call and tell me a UFO had landed in her driveway. I was a little taken aback, so I asked her to describe it while I dispatched officers using her exact wording. Of course officers scoffed but still went en route. She said there was a silver metallic object that came out of the sky and landed in her drive. Officers arrived on scene and there was a silver metallic object in her driveway. It was dark out at this time, so they approached it and found it to be a weather balloon. So it could actually be classed as a UFO. It had instructions on how to return it, so officers returned it a few days later. I imagine that happens fairly often. Was this woman hysterical or pretty chill? I'd say she was more excited than anything. She was able to answer questions but laughed a lot and repeatedly said, "I know this sounds crazy. This sounds like a good time." I was at a friend's house when his tetchy neighbor accidentally crash landed a small experimental drone in his backyard. It didn't look like a drone as we know. This thing was shiny and looked like the classic UFO design. We were laughing hysterically at the thought of 5-inch aliens trying to invade Earth. I was doing IT work at a dispatch center when a 911 call came in from a woman who said that she came home and heard a burglar upstairs. This was in a small town that doesn't get much crime. The town sent 5 of their own cops, plus they requested mutual aid from 2 neighboring towns. A total of about 10 officers cordoned off the area and set up a perimeter. Cops went into the house looking for the burglar. They found that the noise was caused by a Roomba that got trapped in a closet. The vacuum was banging against the walls and the closet door trying to escape. No arrests were made that day. Fortunately, no one was injured either. Okay, I laughed out loud at this one. Confession. I have thought multiple times that my Roomba running upstairs, that my husband started randomly via the app on his phone, was a burglar. Man, that would scare me if my husband did that. There are times where I wonder what the hell the noise upstairs is, and I'm the one who turned the Roomba on. No arrests were made that day, so the Roomba just got away with it, left free to terrorize some other poor, unsuspecting victim. Terrible. I had a guy call 911 and wanted to report that a woman had stolen his money. We were swamped that night, so I kept him on the line trying to get further information. Upon asking a few more questions about the woman and her description, it was obvious he was describing a prostitute. He then began to cry and begged me to not judge him for hiring a prostitute. I promised him I wouldn't judge him and I would send him an officer as soon as we had one available. He hung up and I pended the call as the woman was no longer on scene. He called back on 911 less than a minute later and proceeded to want to talk about his hiring a prostitute until officers arrived. My partner and I continued to pick up his call after we had to place him on hold several times to take other 911 calls during the 15-minute period it took for officers to get to him. He ended up getting arrested for disorderly conduct that night as he was extremely intoxicated and decided he wanted to have a go at the officers when they arrived. Is it not illegal to hire a prostitute where you're from? Yes, it is. However, this was years ago and he wasn't charged with that crime since there was no victim there to make a statement. Fascinating. Admitting to it on a recorded line wasn't enough evidence? Because their electricity went out and they wanted the police to fix it, then got upset when I told them they needed to call their power company. I've also had someone call because their neighbor's tree was dropping leaves into their yard and they wanted the neighbor to clean it up. And one of the funniest, most ridiculous, because someone's automatic sprinklers turned on while they were walking their dog and they got wet. Wanted to press and all charges. People call for the most petty things ever. I would always have them call back on the non-emergency line as soon as they told me the ridiculousness. 911 is for emergencies only, boys and girls. And one of the funniest, most ridiculous, because someone's automatic sprinklers turned on while they were walking their dog and they got wet. Wanted to press and all charges. What the? But I'm allergic to water. I'll literally die. My cousin had that allergy. I threw some scalding water on him and he started developing red patches and blisters. She got shampoo in her eye while showering. She rinsed it out, and her vision was unaffected, but it, really stung for a minute. She was 27 and could not be talked out of having paramedics dispatched. When the medics got there, they couldn't talk her out of going to the hospital. She was fine. At least until she got word from her insurance company that they weren't going to pay for her frivolous and unnecessary ambulance ride. Oh hey, I work in ambulance billing. I get the other side of that call, which is a patient and her mother Karen calling to yell at me because insurance won't pay for the stupid and unnecessary ambulance ride. I tell them the trip has been deemed not medically necessary and they can appeal to insurance. However, the bill is $XXXX and they need to make payment before it goes to collections. When I get, well, I thought it was medically necessary to take said bullshit trip, they get, okay, that makes them crazy. Like, no, we won't change the coding so Princess Snowflake Fragile Flowers insurance will pay. Not happening. No, there's no discount for stupid. No, I don't have any sympathy for you. It's your bill, and it's not my credit. And when they start cussing me out, I politely tell them, you absolutely will not speak to me like that. I am ending this call, which makes them explode. I use top hindest with medical billing, just checking codes and confirming diagnoses, not dealing with patients. I overheard some phone calls from people who did have contact with patients, and I have no idea how you put up with that shit. Although I'm sure there has to be a code for patient is a fragile snowflake princess and can't be reasoned with an ICD-10. V97.33XD, sucked into jet engine. Subsequent encounter. W56.22XA, bitten by orca. Initial encounter. They are so very specific. Once was on a team that built an app that connected with the ICD-10 database. All the unit test patients we made had the weirdest diagnosis because that was super funny to us after working on the thing for months. A guy called because an injured bear was in his front yard for a few hours. It was a giant landscaping boulder that had been there for years. Whoa, what was he on and where can I buy some? Are you sure you want that? Little old lady would call every morning to ask what the weather was like outside. No matter how many times we told her to stop, a grown man wanted to press charges against someone who flipped him off while driving. Every morning to ask what the weather was like outside. Was she in an interior apartment? I think just old and lonely. Or, my aunt worked on these in the 80s. She said a woman once called saying her gravy had gone cold. This is my favorite. Was she asking for help? Did she want a replacement gravy? Just needed to let someone know? Her logic was the gravy went cold too quickly, so there must be an issue with the kettle. My aunt said the fire brigade aren't going to come out and fix your kettle. Just buy a new kettle. Is putting gravy in a kettle normal where you're from? There are apparently multiple people each month who think they can call the emergency number asking for the police to give them a ride home because they got plastered at a bar and don't want to drink and drive. Actually, this kinda was me once. My car broke down on a back road in New Hampshire one time. Late at night, I was 20 minutes out from the nearest decent sized town and 25 minutes from home. I called AAA for a tow. They contacted NH State Police so that my dead car wasn't sitting on the side of a sheer drop on a road where people go 40-50 miles per hour. Oh, and no hazard lights because my alternator died. A nice state trooper showed up, shot the shit with me and my husband while we waited for a tow. Once the truck showed up, I asked him for a taxi company number. This was pre-Uber, so the chances of me getting that taxi at 10 PM in rural NH was slim. He kinda looked at us like, I probably shouldn't, but, so we got to ride home in a state trooper cruiser. It was fun. Those things can really go fast and stay in control on windy, steep NH roads. Okay, have to know. Did you sit in the front or the back? Well, there were 3 people. State trooper, OP, and husband. And the car probably only had 2 front seats. So someone sat in the back and it almost certainly wasn't the state trooper. I will never forget that brief period in early 2018 when KFC ran out of chicken and police in the UK received so many calls about it that they had to put out a notice asking people to stop. What exactly did they think the police could do about KFC's lack of chicken? When that was happening I thought it was crazy. If that happened now I wouldn't bat an eyelid. I need someone to help me take the lasagna out of the oven. I have no mitts. Who doesn't have some towels or an old shirt to use instead? Surely they weren't wearing every piece of fabric in their house. Even if they were, it isn't like you can't take your cloths off and use them. Move the oven mitts. Not dispatch, but I used to field emergency court in the UK. Emergency court is more or less 24-hour walk-in. It's strictly for cases that can't wait to be heard in regular court. Deportation, life support, emergency custody, serious stuff. That did not dissuade some dude from turning up and demanding that we stop his neighbor's cat from trespassing on his land though. He ended up being fined later for repeatedly calling 999 over it. People call us all the time because they are not from a rural area, and they think their two-wheel drive vehicle can't go over our mountain roads. They get stuck, and somehow think because they are on federal ground that we are obligated to help them. We are not. Usually, these brainiacs who take their 1988 Accord over forest highways also don't bring anything warm to wear or any extra food either. When they do remember to bring something, it is usually a child that won't do well in the cold overnight, and when they get stuck and learn that AAA does not go 50 miles off of the pavement to come save you, they really start to panic. Either you have $3,000 for a private tow to maybe come get you, a long hike out, or you are truly in danger and then maybe a search and rescue team will come out, at which point you may again receive a bill for their services. People, just come a little bit prepared, please. When they do remember to bring something, it is usually a child that won't do well in the cold overnight. Your wording here is glorious. I love these calls, but only because the towers people hit from BFE are usually so outdated that they don't transmit phase 2 data, so no lat long. I love figuring out where someone is when they can't tell you where they are. Pro tip, if they have enough service to call in, they can usually navigate to findmaza.com in their phone's web browser. I have used this a number of times. Have them put it on speaker, go to that site, and have them push the button to switch format to whatever your CAD uses. Works great. To come to their third floor apartment and change the TV channel. Somewhat innocuous, especially considering that the subject calling was quadriplegic, but 30 days and 150 calls with the same request later, it got pretty old. 150 calls in a month is nowhere near the record though. That record is owned by a local gentleman who called 217 times in a 4-hour period rambling on about Nazi zombie violence, mayhem, wounds and zircon ray technology. His phone was not GPS enabled, so we were never able to track him down. But at least when the Nazi zombie apocalypse comes, he will be proven right. But at least when the Nazi zombie apocalypse comes, he will be proven right, I think. Deep down, we all fear that day. Was this around 2014? Nazi zombies caused by alien goo was a major plot point in South Park, The Stick of Truth. No, this was 2018-ish. I'm pretty comfortable that it was schizophrenia speaking, not Trey Parker. Not a dispatcher, but a dumb caller. Granted, I was about 7 years old at this time though. A little background. My parents both worked and my mom worked early evening to about 11-12 at night and my dad got home about 6 PM then. So there was about a 2-3 hour gap where it was just me and my much older siblings, 8+ years at home. Well, one of these days my brothers were in charge of getting dinner going because dad was going to be later than normal. Having 2 teenage boys in charge of dinner was my parents' mistake. However, my brothers thinking I had no authority or power over them was another mistake. They refused to make any food. I was 7 and had no idea how to make anything other than a horrible mixture of uncooked pinto beans, flour, and chocolate syrup. And I was begging for them to cook. Still nada. In their defense, Super Mario Sunshine is a really good game and as an adult I can now understand the predicament they were in. Addictive stuff. In a hoe, my ornery, impatient butt gets the bright idea of calling 911 for help. Great plan, right? They'll bring food for me and all will be good. Well, for some reason as soon as the dispatcher picks up, I freeze. The only thing they hear is a little girl shakingly say sorry right before hanging up, as their protocol demands. We had 3 police officers show up banging on our front and back door. My brothers ended up answering the door in only boxers and blankets wrapped around them. All was fine in the end and nobody got in trouble and I finally got my dinner. It was a stupid reason to call, but resulted in a hilarious story. I bet they learned their lesson. Some guy cut his foreskin during a wank. The whole office laughed their hands off. I mean, that's one way to get circumcised. There's more than one way to skin a cat, right? How the yuck? Join our community Discord, link in description. Girlfriend is a dispatcher and she has a ton of dummies calling in. Her most wholesome call was a little boy called to ask if they had his uncle's phone number because he had just gotten a turtle and really wanted to tell his uncle. Or my paramedic friend was called out to someone with a hangover. I mean, hangovers can be pretty emergent. LOL. Fireball gets me every time. The first and last time I drank tequila I thought I was going to find out if you could actually die from a hangover. Turns out it only feels like it. Not dispatch but a firefighter once called to effect entry into a house for paramedics. The occupant, who a tippling way, had called them because, drumroll please, she couldn't close her curtains. I mean, if she couldn't close the curtains because she fell off a ladder and broke her spine. I'd love to hear that conversation. 999. What's your emergency? Huh? I can't close my curtains. 999. You can't close your curtains? Huh? I can't close my curtains. 999. I don't think that's something we can help with. Huh? I also fell off a ladder and broke my spine but just need paramedics to close my curtains. Probably calls like this are quite common. Hello, I am feeling kind of cold. Are you outside? What are you wearing? Nah, I just had to take my shirt off because it got soaked. Why is your shirt soaked? Oh well, I was chopping vegetables and missed, so my hand is bleeding quite a bit. I don't know if this story counts but I know someone who had to be rushed to hospital because she accidentally swallowed her false teeth whilst eating fried chicken. And here's the doozy. Didn't notice until she got another piece of chicken and tried to bite into it with her gums. An entire set of false teeth. She had to call an ambulance to take her to the hospital because when she called family members to ask them, they didn't believe her because it was so ridiculous. How? False teeth aren't exactly small. We've all wondered the same thing. She's a morbidly obese woman and wolfs down her food normally and so it just went down the gullet. When the doctor operated and fished it out of her, it turns out she'd actually bitten them in half. So that probably why it went down a little easier. The surgeon said it was the most outrageous thing he's ever seen. LOL. She'd actually bitten them in half. How did she bite them in half? Without teeth? Not a dispatcher, but firefighter. We were called out to a residence one very frosty morning midwinter during a very long cold snap. Because the homeowner couldn't open his front door and was unable to get out to get to work. We drove up. I got out, ready to force the door open. But tried it first. It opened with minimal effort, frozen a bit. I opened the door and called out fire department. Did you still need us? He was so embarrassed and it was hilarious. I've mentioned before, I had someone that wanted a vehicle towed because the license plate was slanderous towards her dead mother and the vehicle had STDs. Her claim. Got mad I wouldn't send out a CSI team, called me an idiot with more colorful language. Filed a complaint on me, then filed a complaint on my supervisor. A personal pet peeve of mine is when someone on Medicare doesn't have to pay for an ambulance ride so they call 911 for doctor's appointments. By policy, we have to send them. It never fails, a cardiac arrest will come out and my closet medic is taking someone to a routine appointment. However, COVID seemed to have brought the Karens out from all over. For the last 4 months it's been call after call of kids playing within 6 feet of each other. A personal pet peeve of mine is when someone on Medicare doesn't have to pay for an ambulance ride so they call 911 for doctor's appointments. Medicare Medicaid doesn't have non-emergency medical transportation in your state. WTF. My state and all the neighboring states do. You just call an 800 number in advance and schedule a ride for your apt. Not me, but my parents. They were 911 dispatchers for 16 years. They frequently got calls from people who said there was a black person near their house on the sidewalk. Their reason was they look suspicious. Ugh. I get calls like this from time to time. But it was even worse in my last job. I worked security in a gated community for well-off senior citizens and we got calls like this all the time. Often, it was one of the landscapers, a caregiver, or even our own security officers. They were never doing anything more suspicious than what they did every day. Exactly. doing nothing suspicious at all. That's how they trick you. Make you comfortable by doing their job for years and then they steal $20 from your purse. The long con. I know about a person who called because he needed help with his homework. Parents teach kids to call 911/999 if they ever need help. So the person probably thought it wasn't for just emergencies, lol. Yee. This is why my parents made a point to be clear when teaching me. It's only for emergencies. If you're a parent and just tell your kid call 911 for help and leave it at that, you're part of the problem. This is gonna sound really weird, but I accidentally drew a cursed arcane rune trying to solve my trigonometry homework, and now anyone who looks at it immediately turns insane from its incomprehensible nature. Mind sending an officer over to help? One mosquito bite on her leg has been itchy for over 4 hours. She was calling from Starbucks to her son, got a bit of sunscreen in his mouth when she was slathering his face. 3 wedding ring won't come off their finger. We get one of these calls every few months. I could go on and on. 3 wedding ring won't come off their finger. We get one of these calls every few months. This can actually turn serious. Have seen gangrene caused when finger swells up and cuts off circulation. Not a dispatch, but one time my parents were out on a date and I called the police because my brothers were pulling my hair. I guess on the phone I sounded like I was screaming, so the police showed up at my house just as my parents got home. I got in trouble. Your brothers should have been in trouble. I mean, they're not wrong. Not a dispatcher, but someone as a 3-year-old who called 911 that my dad went to work and that I miss my dad. I stuck to him like a magnet as a little kid. I'm assuming why I called 911 was probably because I only knew those 3 numbers on the phone, and seeing that you can talk to people on it. Thinking back, I feel so bad for doing that. According to my mom, the cops did show up at our house just to check what was up. Or my heart. In the UK, a woman in her 60s called the police because she was watching a live WWE show where 2 wrestlers, HHH and Stone Cold Steve Austin, were beating up The Rock. She later said she knows it's all just a show, but thought those 2 pesky bad guys had genuinely decided to attack The Rock. It's still real to her. Damn it. My ex-boyfriend called an ambulance to take him to the hospital because he couldn't feel his right arm. It turns out he had just slept on that arm all night, so he just needed to wait for the blood circulation to fix itself. He literally woke up and immediately called an ambulance. We live in a small town, so it took 2 minutes, and by the time he got there the feeling started coming back, but he ordered an MRI on his family's comprehensive medical insurance just to confirm. Also, this same ex-boyfriend booked himself a dentist appointment for excruciating mouth pain so bad he couldn't eat anything, and it turns out he'd just bitten the inside of his cheek. The dentist laughed him out of his office. Your ex-boyfriend sounds like spare parts. I definitely dodge a bullet with that one. My mother was an ambulance dispatcher. She said the dumbest call she got was someone asking for an ambulance because her nails broke. I once called as a teenager because the power was out and I wanted to know if it would be on soon. In my defense, I kept exotic reptiles that require very specific temperatures and it was winter. I was concerned for their health. That's just really cute. I'm not a dispatcher, but I called when I was a kid because I was hungry. I'm sure I made that woman's day. When I was in college, my Poe's not quite smartphone would butt dial 911 all the time. The dispatcher would call me back a minute later and ask if I was okay. I had to apologize a lot. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for 3 videos a day.